Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Melissa, welcome in our auditorium for this very special occasion. Have you looked behind you, Melissa? You have to look behind you because you came in. It is so wonderful to see that the whole auditorium is full on this very hot day to watch you become full professor here at our university. And it is exceptional on Friday afternoon, this hour, to have a full auditorium. So you can be already very proud. Dear Melissa, it is with great pleasure that I address you at this academic ceremony, where once again a woman is accepting the position of professor. When I say accept, it almost sounds like such a position is offered to a lot of people, until we finally find someone who is kind enough to accept. But anyone who knows the academic world even a little knows that in reality it's completely the opposite. Obtaining a position like this is only for the best of the best. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Melissa is in the spotlight today. Be it in sports or at work, Melissa wants to be the best. Her friend and colleague, Zina Nime, gave her the nickname Quintessential because Melissa does everything perfectly, she says. Melissa knows what she wants and is open about her ambitions. Zina learned that about her soon after they met back in 2005, when they and 12 other PhD candidates started as the first PhD cohort at the Maastricht School of Governance. And when asked what her plan for the future was, I will tell it, Melissa replied, "I want to become the Dean of the School of Governance." Now that is a good ambition, I like that. It's noted now, you've all heard it. She is a go-getter, Zina says, very ambitious, focused on what she wants, a very hard worker, demanding of others and herself, fun to talk to, and not afraid to take risks. So you see, I have my spies in the faculty. Those qualities showed up at a very young age. Back in the United States, when Melissa was a toddler, her mom had to put her on a leash sometimes to prevent her from taking off on a dangerous adventure. In the end, the leash broke big time in 2003, when Melissa crossed the ocean to begin a master's program all the way in the Netherlands. I wonder what her mom thinks of the work Melissa is doing now, in countries like Afghanistan and Rwanda, flying around the world to do her research, teaching and advisory work. Perhaps she sometimes wonders why, of all people, her daughter had to take on the task of making sure that migration and refugee policy is based on facts rather than gut feelings. At the same time, I hope she's happy, just like we are, that Melissa did take it on. I was also told that you are not afraid of staying outside of secured compounds. I'm not sure your family wants to know that, with local communities while doing your fieldwork, and that you will always try and taste some of the local food, even though you had already forgotten, or even though you already got sick from doing that several times. But that experience won't prevent you from trying something new in the next country. Is that too a symptom of your tremendous perseverance, I was wondering? Or could you also be a bit stubborn as well? I leave it up to you. What I do know, after talking to Zina and another colleague, Katie Kushminder, is that Melissa is extremely energetic. She completed the Ironman triathlon. That is amazing. It's on my list forever, and I will never succeed. And her mark says, "I run to relax." She is also very positive and an excellent motivator for her team. She's always willing to share opportunities and experiences with others, which can explain also the email invitations for Yoga at the Institute that her colleagues receive, a weekly evening yoga session led by Melissa. When she's in the office day and night, she might as well do yoga there, she must have thought. By putting in many, many hours, she has managed to build up the migration research group at the School of Governance to what it is today. That is a tremendous achievement. But she's not going to rest before Europe's top migration institute is established in Maastricht. And I somehow get the feeling that you will succeed in that too. To Melissa's parents and 2 younger brothers, you should be very proud, just as she always speaks with enormous pride and warmth about the family. Melissa left the States, but the emotional connection you have as a family is stronger than any leash could provide. And Florian, who Melissa met in Maastricht, and who is a great supporter of her, I also saw just upstairs, you can be equally proud. I am very honored to have a colleague like Melissa at our university, who is now 1 step closer to becoming the Dean of Maastricht School of Governance. We'll talk about it later. Melissa, we have 4 female deans of the 6, so we need 6, of course. Huh? That's, Melissa, I wish you lots of luck with your future, although we know that luck is just a small piece of the puzzle called success. And keep running to relax, but I know you will do that. I've said enough, the floor is yours.
Wow, so that's some pressure to perform now. So, dear colleagues, friends, family, thank you so much for being here today. It's such a pleasure to be able to give this inaugural lecture to all of you today and to such a full house. So the title of my talk today is Migration and the Depth and Breadth of Migration Studies. And while I know this has confused some of you, even my comms team checked that I had not made a typo, which I am perhaps famous for doing, so it was good that they checked on that. I did mean for this to be a little bit provocative, because I do want to show the depth and breadth of migration. And within my own career and the work that I've done in our group here, we work in so many different areas, and I thought it just wouldn't do justice to the field to not talk about the extent of it. So first, I want to talk a little bit about who is a migrant and different types of migrants, just to get that out of the way. And then, why do people migrate? Reasons and motivations for migration. Then we'll move on to the crux of my talk, the links between migration and other walks of life, other areas. And of course, a very important aspect of this is the effects of migration. Well, I work at a public policy school, UNU Merit, as most of you know. And of course, that means that policy matters. And so I'll talk a little bit about policy. And this is an inaugural talk, so there will be something about my future research agenda. So let's get right down to it. One of the things we've done at UNU Merit is to create a migration story blog. And the purpose of this is to normalize migration, to show how migration is a part of our everyday life, how all of us have our own migration stories, be it our families, from generations behind us, or some of us who have migrated currently, or those of us who have migration all throughout our family histories. So what we've done here is actually take the stories of many colleagues at the United Nations University and put them in a blog form so that we can show how migration is just a normal phenomenon that we see today. So, types of migration. So what do you think about when someone says migration or migrant? This is often used in a kind of emotive way, and we often think different things immediately. Certain things might come directly to mind, like refugees or people crossing oceans. We might also think about people in search of better jobs, or people who are migrating permanently or temporarily, or those who are forced or non-forced, or those who are highly skilled or lower skilled. So migration really encompasses a large group of different types of people. The reasons and motivations for why people migrate are also quite different, and they're often overlapping. So people may have reasons to migrate that are both forced and voluntary, and sometimes these are also overlapping, and someone may have already felt the need to leave because of maybe war or persecution, but at the same time, maybe their water supply has been cut off and they don't have access to services anymore. So there are many different reasons why people migrate: conflict, violence, war, persecution, environmental factors, both slow onset factors and maybe shocks like a hurricane or a tsunami, earthquakes, things like that that can force people to migrate quite quickly. Access to services, as I said, and this could be at many different levels. Family reasons, so migrating to join your family or to create a family. It's actually one of the largest reasons why people migrate, and we often forget about it. Education, retirement, jobs or lifestyle migration, just wanting to go and experience another culture, and generally just better opportunities. And as I said before, these are often overlapping. So a person often doesn't migrate for only one reason. I myself first migrated to the Netherlands to study, but probably also for some lifestyle reasons. I was interested in experiencing a different culture in a different place. So if we talk about migration, Anne, there are so many different migration Annes. And of course, I have a limited time to talk to you today, so I tried to pick out just a few. So when we also think about migration, there are many different ways in which this can interact with other areas. First, we have the drivers of migration, or the reasons why people migrate in the first place. Then, once someone has migrated, this can feed back onto the drivers or reasons that someone might migrate. Then we also have the effects of that migration, and the effects of that migration can also lead back to the migratory process. And at the same time, those same things that drive migration can also affect the impacts at the end, and the impacts can affect the drivers. So you can already see that migration is complicated, and I think you're all quite aware of the fact that it's complicated with how much we see it in the media, in policy, and the news. If it were easy, we probably wouldn't be talking about it at all. Of course, context also matters. Your country of origin, your country of destination, the community level effects, individual characteristics, these all matter also within this migration process. So I'll talk about a few different things: migration and development, poverty and inequality, health and nutrition, corruption, labor markets, entrepreneurship, technological change and innovation, gender, environment, and policy. So first, if we start with migration and development, of course, I think many of you know that this is an area very close to my own heart. So we know that the directionality within migration and development is actually circular. So migration can lead to more development. We know that, especially at an individual or a community level. But at the same time, development can also lead to more migration, which is very well known from the colleagues in the field here, but maybe not so well known outside of academia and this academic circles. So let's look at some of the work, just actually of some colleagues in this room very quickly. This is some of the work of Hein de Haas, who's also in the audience today, which actually shows very clearly how migration and development are intertwined. So here you can see, using the Human Development Index, that countries at a very low level of development are actually those that have the least amount of migration. And as a country begins to develop, we start to see more and more migration from that country, until a kind of tipping point around middle income status, where migration then starts to reduce again. But it doesn't go to zero, and it doesn't even go back down to the levels of least developed or less developed countries. So what you can see here is, if we say, well, as countries develop, that people will stop migrating, that's actually just not the case. This is also some work from the OECD, which shows something similarly. And we can see at about a level of $10,000 or $15,000 per year, per person, that's about the time when we see migration starting to decrease. But again, it never stops. And that has to do with many other different policy factors and issues of the global race for talent that I don't have time to get into today. But I think it's important for us to understand these mechanisms. Migration, poverty, and inequality. Again, we have a kind of circular relationship here. So migration can affect both poverty and inequality. It's very clear from the research and from a lot of our work in the field, in Ethiopia, in Afghanistan, in Burundi, many other places around the world, that migration really does help to reduce poverty in those countries where people are migrating from. At the micro level, at the individual level, we know that migration is very important for poverty reduction, both the severity and the amount of poverty that we see. Now, inequality is a little bit more tricky. It's not so straightforward. We know that migration can both help to reduce inequality, but it could also possibly exacerbate it. So it's really all about who leaves in the country, who's migrating. If it's those who are from, let's say, the lower economic sphere or middle economic sphere, then we may see that this reduces inequality. But if it's only the elite that go to migrate, it can actually exacerbate that inequality that's already going on in the country. At the same time, both of these things can also be drivers for migration. So the poverty or the feeling of deprivation or feeling that one doesn't have as much as someone else may be a driver for someone to want to migrate. But again, we know it's not the poorest of the poor that migrate, but still poverty can be a reason for migration, as well as inequality. When there are large differences between different populations, this may force people or induce people to want to migrate in the future. So if we look at migration and health, there are a lot of different aspects of migration and health that I could talk about here, but I'll just pick out a few. So one is health, the health of or healthcare in transit countries and in destination countries. So the access that migrants have to healthcare in destination countries can often be lacking, and this can be for multiple reasons. It can be because they're just not allowed to go to health services, or there could also be other barriers to the reason why they're not getting health access. That might be because of language or just lack of knowledge of the system where they're going. At the same time, we know that there is what we call a healthy migrant effect. And that means that many of you in this audience know there's a kind of selection of who decides to migrate. Those people with more agency, with more will, and often those people who are already more healthy. It's a certain kind of age range that that migrates. And so they come to a country and they're already a bit more healthy than the local population of that country. But what we also see is as they start to especially assimilate into food cultures of places like the United States or Europe, assimilating into fast food cultures, we see a rapid decrease in their health because of the adoption of habits of the local country that they have entered. At the same time, migrants often do dirty, dangerous jobs, which can be more likely to also send them into negative health outcomes. There's also the health that we should think about of those who stay behind. So sometimes one person in the family migrates abroad, and we have the family that is left behind or who stays behind. And the money that they're able to send back, the knowledge that they're able to send back, is also something that can help to increase the health outcomes of those who stay behind, especially if we think about maternal and child mortality and health. We can often see better birth weights of children who are in migrant families. We see that their families are often able to get better access to health care, more preventative health care, by having a migrant abroad. And finally, a bit more of a controversial topic is also the mobility or the migration of healthcare workers around the world. So we know that people migrate all over the world, and healthcare workers are in high demand pretty much everywhere. And so we really do see a global race for talent for healthcare workers. Some countries, like the Philippines, for instance, actually train nurses, especially, to export them all over the world. This is a specific strategy of the country to basically train the nurses of the world. Now, if we move on to migration and corruption. So I think some of these topics are a bit more straightforward, and you would think, yes, of course, migration and development, migration and poverty. Maybe corruption is a little bit less straightforward for you. So some work that Jorgen Carling, Erlen Pasha, and I have done has looked at the 10 different ways in which migration and corruption are linked. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into 10 of those right now. I'll just talk about a few. So corruption can absolutely be a motivation for migration, both directly or indirectly. So if you think of corruption here, corruption in many different areas, so in police, judiciary, in the political sphere, in education, in healthcare. This can also happen in many different ways. So I'm talking about corruption here now in very broad terms, from bribery, embezzlement, theft and fraud, to extortion, blackmail, abuse of discretion, favoritism, nepotism, or clientelism. So these can all lead to a deprivation in certain areas of one's life, like a lack of human security, lack of access to education, lack of access to healthcare or political participation or economic participation, which can all in turn make someone have the desire or have someone push someone to have the desire to migrate, and then also make the decision to migrate. So these are kind of the indirect links. At the same time, someone who is unhappy with a specific corrupt situation in their current country might just decide to migrate. There's also you may have heard of brain drain or even brawn drain, the loss of muscles. I think that there's also something that could be happening called the morality drain. When someone from I would call it here country A, this is a high corruption country, decides they want to leave due to corruption because they themselves are less corrupt and they are unhappy with the current status quo. They move from a more corrupt country to a less corrupt country. And research shows, some of the research that we have done here, that in general, on average, people move from more corrupt countries to less corrupt countries. So what does this do then? This leaves only those who are okay with the status quo or those who are more corrupt to stay behind, hence the morality drain. I don't want to only show a bleak picture, so we could also have a morality gain. So again, showing this same picture, first with country A, the high corruption country, a person leaving due to corruption, entering country B, a low corruption country. What could then happen is that through social remittances, the transfer of norms and values and knowledge back to the countries of origin, we could actually see this behavior being transmitted back to country A. And how can this happen? Well, this can happen in several ways. If we're starting off in the destination country, the low corruption country, this person could have migrated because of corruption issues or also just for other reasons. But while they're in that low corruption country, they start to take on those new norms. And they can start to transfer this back to their friends and family and their countries of origin on purpose or also unconsciously. Many of us start to take on different norms and values and don't even realize it until much, much later in the process. And this all depends on migrant characteristics and context as to how this transfer happens. And this transfer can happen through just conversations, Skype, WhatsApp, Facebook. It can also happen through short-term visits or more long-term visits back to the country of origin. And so in that country of origin, there are also some things that matter for who's receiving this. So the person that's receiving it on the other end can do this both consciously or unconsciously. It depends very much on the receiver characteristics, just like on the sender characteristics. For instance, if it's a very young person who's trying to send back these norms to an older person in a country where this power distance is quite large, this might be much more difficult. And this leads to can lead to a change in both the perceptions of corruption and then a desire to reduce corruption, and from there, actions to reduce corruption. So moving on to migration and labor, or labor markets. Again, both in the origin and destination countries for migrants. So what you probably hear a lot about in the political debate is how migration affects labor markets in countries of destinations. Are immigrants taking our jobs? Are they reducing our wages? Well, research shows that in general, migrants are not taking your jobs. Migrants are actually helping to expand the economies, and they're doing the jobs that others are not able to do or not willing to do. They often also expand the economies through other ways like entrepreneurship, which I will talk about in just a moment. Something that less attention is focused on is on the origin country. So how does migration affect those countries where the person is coming from, both with regards to employment and wages? Well, in many countries where there's a high unemployment rate, migration can take pressure off of the labor market in those countries, actually helping to reduce the unemployment rates there. And in some cases also increasing wages. So there was a joke during the large movements of Poles to the UK or the rest of the European Union that you could no longer find a Polish plumber in Poland. And that meant that if you were a plumber in Poland at that time, you could ask a lot of money for your services. So wages shot up for those people. So following on this, entrepreneurship feeds very well into migration and labor markets. There are a lot of different things at play here. So again, we've got our two boxes, our origin and our destination countries. With migrants going to the destination countries, they're able to send back money through monetary remittances back to their countries of origin. And here, these remittances can be fed into entrepreneurial projects, into businesses that are startups or existing business to help fuel them. At the same time, in the destination countries, migrants often become entrepreneurs in their own right. This could be because of necessity or because of opportunity. So they could see a niche that they could directly go into, whether this is in specific restaurants or in specific types of import-export. But then sometimes migrants decide to return. And when they return, they may also decide to start businesses upon their return. This could be bringing back entrepreneurial skills that they developed in the country of destination, or it could just be bringing back knowledge and new resources back to the country of origin to also create new businesses there. But that's not the whole story. You can also have transnational businesses. So migrants very much help to increase trade between countries and can also create, you can think of kind of import-export businesses between two countries. So migration, technological change, innovation, and development. So many of you know that I work at UNU Merit, and this is the heart of what we do there. So of course it's important that we discuss how migration is related to this. Again, we have our origin and our destination country. With migration, we can see that new ideas and different cultures and different ideas of work, along with skills, can be transferred to the country of destination. Here we see increased diversity and innovation. So take the United States, for instance. We know that immigrants in the United States are disproportionately represented higher in the patents that are filed in the United States. We know that diversity in education and in the workplace can often lead to more innovation and the stimulating of each other. At the same time, the knowledge transfer and the social remittances, often on technology and many other areas, transferred back to the country of origin can lead to technological change and also spur innovation. Now, migration and gender. I know as soon as I put up a slide that says gender, everyone says, oh, she's going to talk about women. But gender is not just about women. Gender is about men and women, and I want to discuss that here. So, one of the first things we see is the feminization of migration. I know I said I'm not just going to talk about women, and now I'm starting to talk about women. But the feminization of migration is a phenomenon that we've been seeing over time now. This does not just mean that women are migrating more than they have before. It's also about the reasons why women are migrating. While we do have more rights given to migrants nowadays around the world, more access to, for instance, family reunification, allowing more women to be able to follow spouses, and also vice versa, we also now have a kind of gender selection with regard to demand for labor. So we really see this gender differentiation demand for labor around the world. And with aging populations and increasing demand in the health and care sectors more generally, we're seeing women migrating more and more in their own right for specific skills that are often associated more with women. It could be in care, it could be in health, it could even be in picking some berries that are considered to need delicate hands. But at the same time, we also see a gender selective demand for labor for men, often moving specifically for construction or harder labor work. And through all of this, through the migration of people between countries, we also see changing values and norms around gender. We also see changing gender roles. So one of the things that we've started to see with a lot of women migrating, for instance, from countries like Moldova, a country that we've also done a lot of work in, that men are often staying behind with the children. And we see them also stepping into roles that they didn't have before. So spending more time with their children, learning how to cook. They're still not really keen on doing the laundry, but they have, started to step into other roles. Of course, this depends on where people migrate to and where they're coming from as to how much change we can see within these gender roles. And finally, the whole migration process that people go through can also be very gendered, and how people experience the migration process depends a lot on their gender. Some of the work that we're doing also with colleagues in this room has to do with migration and corruption, and we're looking at the gender aspects of that. One of the things that we see is that when people need to pay bribes at border crossings, for instance, this is very different for men and women. Men usually need to pay with money, and women usually need to pay with their bodies. And so we can already see how different this is for the two genders. So moving on to migration and the environment. So again, here we can have effects in both directions. So the environment can be a reason for migration. So sea level rise, droughts, floods, many more things. But also migration can affect the environment, especially when it's large numbers of people moving at once. So you can think here about large refugee movements moving from one place to another. They can heavily affect their environments. So, for instance, if there is not a proper infrastructure set up, you can often have contaminated water, additional pollution, deforestation, especially when people need firewood when they've just crossed a border. So you can see here the different aspects of migration and the environment. So there are many different mechanisms through which all of these effects take place. One is the absence or the presence of a person can have an effect on many of these different areas. The additional money or resources that are gained and can be sent back affects all of these areas, as well as the additional knowledge and skills gained and those possible transfers back. So that's just to give you a brief idea of the field. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these areas, but I should tell you a little bit about the way forward here. So my future research agenda. First, if we look at migration and development. One of the things that we are looking more and more at now are public attitudes. But this so far has not really been linked with development. So I showed you those curves at the beginning of how migration and development are linked, that as countries develop, we see more and more migration, but then to a certain peak, and then it still stays relatively high. So it's not that we need to, for instance, develop countries so that people stop migrating, which is, I would already say, morally wrong. The point is that as countries start to develop, we start to think about the migration of those people differently. When people are moving from impoverished countries and others are thinking they're going to take my job, then it's like, whoa, we don't want these people here. As soon as we get over that cusp, we start talking about the global race for talent and attracting the best and the brightest. And we start talking about expats and the highly skilled. So it's more about our perception that changes of migrants with development, and I want to see where that tipping point is. Another understudied area is migration and development with regard to non-movers. So we look at how migration affects those who stay behind or those who move or the families who are left behind. But one of the things we haven't really looked at is what happens if someone would like to move and for one reason or other cannot move. You can call them involuntary, immobile people, to coin a term from Jürgen Carling. We have no idea how this affects development. Are people trying so hard to get out of their countries that they just completely forget about their own countries? They stop investing in their own communities and work there? So that's an area that needs to have more looked at. Another area is, does development policy or programming change migration outcomes? So we know nowadays in the policy world there's a lot of money being put towards developing countries to try to reduce the reasons for migration or the quote-unquote root causes of migration. Well, we actually have no idea how effective these programs are, or even if, as I showed you, if you put more development programs in, maybe that just upskills people's abilities, and now it's easier for them to migrate because a country wants those skills more. So actually, we haven't tested these different programs to see what's going on there. With regard to health and nutrition, another area quite close to my heart, what we should really be looking at here is whether or not health knowledge and utilization of those left behind is happening more and more through this transfer of social remittances, how this is happening and how we can help to stimulate this. So migration and corruption, some of the things I've told you now in theory, we don't have that much evidence for yet. We haven't been able to test. So I'd like to test this morality drain, try to test the theory of social remittance transfer with regard to increasing the kind of morality or low corruption values of countries of origin. Another really interesting area to go into is to look at remittances and extortion. Are families, households, or individuals who are receiving that money back in their country of origin, are they more likely to be asked for bribes? Are they more likely to be extorted because officials know that they have someone abroad who could pay that bribe? Or that they're also receiving remittances and have that extra cash? While corruption, as we saw, could possibly be a motivation for migration, it could also not be a motivation for migration. But we have seen some anecdotal evidence that even if it wasn't a reason for someone to migrate in the beginning, it may be a reason for someone to not return after they've had access to a different system and know that other ways are possible. So finally, migration and gender. As I told you, it's not just about women. I actually think that with regard to those who stay behind, a lot of research has been done on women who stay behind, children who stay behind, elderly that stay behind, but very little work has actually been done on the men who stay behind and how the migration of their partner also affects them, their feelings of self-worth, their masculinity, how they're able to function in their own households and in their own societies. And then we can bring it all to policy. Again, I'm working at a public policy school, so we need to still think about policy. Policy coherence. I know this can be quite a confusing term. It's a term that has a lot going on in it, and we've done quite some work here on it. If you think about policy coherence here, just as at a minimum, policies that don't work against each other. You don't give something with one hand and take it away with the other hand. And if we're talking about migration and development policies, this means we need to both look at migration policies, but also at policies in many other areas. You need to think about education policies, development policies, perhaps environmental policies. All of these things are working together. So some of the things that we try to do at UNU Merit are also to create this evidence base to feed into this policy. We do this in many different ways. One of them is by creating dashboards and indicators to actually measure policy coherence for migration and development, both at the national level and at the local level, to help countries know if they're doing a good job in this area and where they should be working better. With all of this, creating this evidence base, what we're trying to do is give advice to governments, to international organizations, to really feed into the debate. And while it's what I've been talking about here is so important to feed into policy advice at many different levels, it's also important that we start to feed this into the broader public and make sure that this knowledge gets out to the broader public. Because in many cases, our counterparts, many of our counterparts are here, colleagues from development cooperation, from different country governments are in the audience today, and you all know this. But the public doesn't. And the public puts pressure on politicians, which make your job more difficult. So what we need to do is also make sure that this evidence is getting out and disseminated in a digestible way to the broader public. So I think I'll leave it there for now. I would just like to say that I'm so happy to be here. It is impossible to thank everyone in this audience and everyone who has played a role in getting me here. So I'm going to apologize already from the beginning if I leave anyone out. There are so many that I should be talking about here. It's often said that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it's definitely taken a lot more than a village to raise me in my academic career. First, to my amazing migration group, who are most of you are in the audience right now, I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to work with. You constantly inspire me and show me what the future can hold. Especially Michaela, Elaine, and Katrin, who I lean on terribly and constantly make me look good. To Katie, Özge, and Sonia, you'll always have a very special place in my heart for helping to build up the migration group from the beginning. To Charlotte, for your excellent skills at turning my ideas into visualizations. The migration group, you're so special to me, and I'm looking forward to a much brighter future with you. To those who have come before me and have set such a good precedent for me to follow in your footsteps, you've all left really big shoes to fill. For your support and showing me the way by example and advice, Hein, Ron, and Khalid. To my Maximite fellow members, So the Maximite is the Maastricht Center for Citizenship, Migration, and Development. To my fellow board members, Valentina, Martin, Hildegard, and Renee, it's been a pleasure working with you to make Maastricht one of the most successful places to do migration research. And especially to Hildegard and Renee, your mentorship and support throughout my career in Maastricht has meant the world to me. You've opened up your home and your hearts to so many, and you're great examples of what success in academics should be and in all aspects of life. I've been lucky enough to have several mentors while heading down this career path. Many people work hard and that is not rewarded, but I've been lucky enough to have people who appreciate and have nurtured my efforts. To Luke, who couldn't be here today, but who challenged me early on to become a professor by 35, and I managed to make that challenge. He always knew how to push me and how to make me go farther as quickly as possible. He always knew how to goad me. To Jorgen, whose words of wisdom have set a great example as an academic, but still showed me how to enjoy life and have nice meals. To Bart for believing in me, to Chris for seeing something in me early on and making all of this possible. I've had so many amazing colleagues. As I said, it's impossible to name everyone. But from the beginning, Mindel, Francisca, Susan, you have been there from the very beginning supporting me. Thank you so much to Student Affairs and many more, especially the secretarial staff, for putting up with me. I know I can make your lives very difficult sometimes. And to the comms team, Howard, Swaley, and Diego, thank you for always being up for my crazy ideas and making migration look so good here. I'm so fortunate to have so many great friends in the audience today who have supported me for so long. Some of you from much before my Maastricht days, and others through my PhD and along this journey. To Josh and Sarah and family, especially Donnie and Alexis, you are family to me. It's truly touching that you're all here today. To Anna, Corinna, Britta, Kristen, Jessica, and Zena, you're all great friends, and many of you are also colleagues. Thank you for always putting up with my craziness and always having confidence in me. I don't have time to go into all of the thank yous that you deserve. I'm so blessed to have a family that believes in me and has always pushed me to my highest potential, giving me the foundation and building blocks to be where I am today. I feel so privileged that you could all be here with me today. My parents, Jeff and Terry, my brothers, Joe and Ben, and my sisters-in-law, Yulia and Liz. I also have the best family-in-law a person could ask for. To Christiana, Walter, Ula, Wolfgang, Toby, and Lisa, since I entered your family, you've only supported me and welcomed me with open arms. To Flo, your words here will never do you justice. You've never doubted me. I couldn't have been here without you. You've always pushed me to be better in whatever I'm doing, whether it be academics or sports or anything else. I'm so grateful to have you. And finally, for all of you who have had to put up with all of my energy, my exercising, especially at work. For instance, my PhD students who are forced to run with me to do their PhD update meetings. Yes, so thank you for your patience. So there are many more people who have been involved on this journey, and I feel so lucky to have so many amazing, clever, thoughtful, generous people in my life. This is only the beginning, and I look forward to the road ahead with all of you.
You're quick. But stand there a little bit longer and take the well-deserved applause. I think people were actually willing to give you a much longer applause. At least I was. Thank you so much, Professor Siegel. Congratulations with this wonderful inaugural address. You told me before we came into this room, I want to do it with a PowerPoint and not with a written text, and I think you made the right decision. I was at your lips for the entire period. Thank you very much. You have a fascinating field of work, and I know that we will hear even more from you in the future. We will now turn to outside. I think that it's getting hot here, eh? It's maybe the gowns that are doing this. We are going to the inner garden, where Professor Siegel and her partner will be standing in a special corner. It's very hot there as well, I can tell you. So please take off the gown at some moment, and we will have a drink and enjoy this very special occasion. Thank you very much, and I hereby close this academic session.